confident the Congress will deliver to my desk both the bipartisan physical infrastructure plan and the Build Back Better plan.
Let's talk now about that budget that President Biden is rolling out. As I mentioned, the price tag is a whopper. $6 trillion represents the highest level of federal spending since the Second World War.
Come on, Charlie Brown. I'll hold the ball and you kick it.
Tonight, a potentially fatal blow to President Biden's massive social spending and climate plan.
This is a no.
Senator Joe Manchin, a Democratic holdout for months over the size and scope of the package, closing the door on the $1.7 trillion bill in its current form.
This time I'm gonna kick that football clear to the moon!
Is the largest American jobs investment since World War II.
It's big, yes. It's bold, yes. And we can get it done.
This is a $6 trillion 22 budget, but overall, if you take a look, we're looking at about $5 trillion in additional spending over the course of a decade. That's because they're plussing up in a lot of different areas as a result of the American jobs and the families plans under the Biden administration.
This is not the president, it's the staff. And they drove some things and they put some things out that were absolutely inexcusable. They know what it is, and that's it.
We got to fight. You know, it's so crazy to see this reality where this is done. Unless they do something, this is done. And
that this thing is dead. And it's a great time to take a postmortem on it, because what killed this bill was actually a inflation print of north of 5.5%.
We want our money back, and we're going to get it. And that's why I'm proposing a financial crisis responsibility fee to be imposed on major financial firms until the American people are fully compensated for the extraordinary assistance they provided to Wall Street.
It's because these problems are solvable, but you don't get a sense that we're moving in Washington with the sense of urgency that's required.
If these companies are in good enough shape to afford massive bonuses, they are surely in good enough shape to afford paying back every penny to taxpayers.
What laws were broken?
That's the same Goldman Sachs that since 2009 has been hit with $8 billion of fines for mortgage fraud and other violations. But Gary had it partly right. None of the major Wall Street CEOs were indicted, let alone jailed. Their firms paid fines as a cost of doing business, a simple tax write-off. Without undergoing real reform, they would eventually thrive as they bought back their own stock. Compensation among the top Wall Street executives has soared. The American people did not share in a real recovery.
Oh, come on, Charlie Brown. No. I'll hold it steady. No. Please. You just want me to come running up to kick that ball so you can pull it away and see me land flat on my back and kill myself. This time you can trust me. See? Here's a signed document.
After months of struggling with soaring prices and busted budgets, tonight Americans are now facing an even more grim reality. Inflation accelerated 7.9% in February compared to last year.
We are of the view that the United States needs to take strong, decisive action to arrest the stress in our financial system. Through our new TARP authority, Treasury will purchase preferred stock in each of the banks represented in this room. That stock will yield 5% the first 5 years, 9% after that. We give you money, you lend it out.
Some of us don't need any capital.
You all need capital.
The stronger banks will serve as cover for the weaker banks. If just some of you take it, the money is a signal that a bank is too weak to survive. The market will devour it.
How much are we talking about? 125 billion.
We're now in the grips of an inflation scare that has put a chokehold on the growth stocks, and it's been a nightmare for tech.
So what is inflation? Inflation is the rise in the prices of goods and services.
Look, if I said we're definitely going to have inflation, you wouldn't need me to tell you what to do. Everybody would know what to do. Get some gold, get some land, get some hard assets, hunker down, take a little leverage if you like, and then make a lot of money.
Why are bondholders so concerned then? Because they want to make sure. They don't believe it. It is going to be inflationary. How much it's going to be inflationary is an issue.
One of the things rich people fear the most is governments devaluing the money they worked so hard to get through inflation. Inflation comes as a result when new money is printed and floods the economy. For the past 100 years, this has been the main plague governments have taken to stabilize the economy. Just print more. Taking a look at the USA right now, the Fed wants to print $2.3 trillion into the economy to avoid a financial collapse.
In 1968, budget deficit reached 2.6% of the total income of America, which was the highest since the end of World War II. One of the primary dangers of a budget deficit is inflation. Because Federal Reserve buys government bond to finance the spending, at the same time release more money into the economy, which drive up prices.
On Park and Fifth Avenues, where the tycoons lived, the number of millionaires in the 1920s jumped 400% over the previous decade. The 20s feeling of limitless horizons was fueled by their lavish lifestyle.
Hoover maintained his view that the federal government should not interfere with free enterprise. He felt that federal regulation would undermine the capitalist system upon which the American economy was structured.
Economic depression, he says, cannot be cured by legislative action. But the basic causes of the deepening crisis remain stubbornly obscure even to the business leaders summoned to the White House.
Hey, lady, you got any money in the bank? You better hurry.
George, let's not stop. Let's go.
A minute there. Now, just remember that this thing isn't as black as it appeared. I'll take mine now. No, but you're thinking of this place all wrong, as if I had the money back in a safe. The money's not here. Well, your money's in Joe's house. That's right next to yours. And in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Maitland's house, and 100 others. You're lending them the money to build, and then they're going to pay it back to you as best they can. Now, what are you going to do, foreclose on them?
Confidence in U.S. banks disintegrates. In the last 60 days of 1930, 600 banks shut.
Now, we can get through this thing all right. We've got to stick together, though. We've got to have faith in each other.
But my husband hasn't worked in over a year, and I need money.
How am I going to live until the bank opens?
I got doctor bills to pay. I need cash. I can't keep that.
The behavior of the stock market and the economy in the late 90s was almost identical with that of the late 20s. The stock market boomed, just as it did in 1929. In 2000, there was also a big stock market crash, and stock prices tumbled. But after the crash in 1929, the economy dived and kept going down. Not so after the crash of 2000.
There's no economic collapse, no depression, no homeless teenagers. Why? Because the Fed added to the money supply in 2001 in response to the crash. It correctly met the challenge, so people didn't lose faith in the money system or in the economy.
In 1869, Thomas Mellon established the T. Mellon & Sons Private Bank and soon took interests in a broader range of industries like oil, steel, coal, media, and the railroads.
Have you heard this idea about the Robin Hood banker's tax?
Yes. It's a sweet little idea, taxing the banks to help the poor, but I don't think it'll work. It's very complicated and would be very tough on the banking sector.
That from 1929 to 1933, the total quantity of money in the United States, the amount of currency, the amount of bank deposits, what Mr. Eccles referred to as M2, that total amount of money declined by 1/3.
John Maynard Keynes was unquestionably one of the greatest economists of all time. Like other economists of his generation, he found the Great Depression both a paradox and a challenge. The core of his theory was that what happened to the quantity of money didn't matter. What really mattered was a particular category of spending. Most important of all, it might be deficit spending by government. If private spending on investment, on house building, was not enough to maintain full employment, then government could always step in and spend enough to make up the difference. The theory of pump priming was born.
That from 1929 to 1933, the total quantity of money in the United States, that total amount of money declined by 1/3.
Keynes pointed out that government spending in the economy leads to more spending. Economists call this the multiplier effect. And here's the idea. When the government spends money, it becomes somebody's income, and they save a portion of that and they spend the rest. That spending becomes somebody else's income, and they save some and spend some. That keeps happening over and over again, and that's called the multiplier effect. An initial change in spending causes a ripple effect through the entire economy and leads to more total spending. And that total amount depends on how much people spend of new income. This is the idea of what Keynes called the marginal propensity to consume. The more people spend, the larger the multiplier effect. By the way, I made a video explaining this idea of geometric series and how to calculate the multiplier. It's right here. Take a look. The idea of the multiplier also explains why we have recessions. If people think the economy is going to be bad and they might lose their job, they're likely to decrease the amount they spend, perhaps going out to eat less often. Restaurant owners see their sales drop, so they lay off some workers, and these workers have less income and they buy less of other stuff, causing other workers to lose their job. Again, there's a ripple effect, but now it's pulling down the economy.
Mises. I knew Milton Friedman, so that's probably the one I'm sort of personally the most biased towards. But I think we are going to see some sort of a return to the classic economic thinking of the 19th and 20th centuries. My villain in economics is more clear. I believe the villain is Keynes, and there was the Keynes line that in the long run we are all dead. Whether or not that is true, I believe that in the long run Keynesianism will be dead.
Our inflation right now is caused by the fact that the federal government is spending and borrowing breathtaking amounts of money.
And inflation hit a 3-decade high in October.
We're now in the grips of an inflation scare
Between the prices at the pump and even the price you're paying for local groceries, inflation is at a 40-year high right now.
Overall, and certainly terrible policy at a time when inflation is so high and we have such a big debt and deficit. So, look, I don't think we should be raising taxes on the economy, and I don't think we should be doing the stimulus spending. And
businesses, don't tell me, Jay Powell, that inflation's transitory.
The most serious problem that our nation has is inflation, and it's getting worse.
Everyone is talking about inflation.
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 Because once that genie of inflation gets out of the bottle, it's hard to get it back in. We're just in a heck of a mess here. And if we pass Build Back Better, it's going to be like throwing kerosene on a tire fire.
so I think, you know, we're in a situation where we need to pull back and stop spending so much on stimulus and focus on the long-term economic growth.
The whole financial system quakes and totters. Men are sitting in the parks all day long, out of work, muttering to themselves.
I mean, I spoke to a guest this morning. She says the risk of inflation is very low.
Yes, traders are not so much a focus on the inflation, but on the deflation theme has.
We had put a lid on the economy last year, hence the deflation winning last year. But now the economy is slowly opening up. That lid is being slowly removed, and now we're seeing the forces of inflation come back into play, like the steam being released from a pot when you lift the lid. Okay? So this is what's happening right now. We're seeing rising prices. We're seeing inflation winning for the moment, for this year, and potentially perhaps until next year. Where I essentially said that the forces of deflation are likely to win in the very near future. In fact, in a book that was published by Robert Prechter, one of the greatest chart analysts out there, in his book, Conquering the Crash, he argues that in the very near future, we're going to see deflation winning, not inflation, as everybody else seems to think.
But nobody talks about the upcoming risk of deflation these days. I think it's necessary to warn you in advance via this video that deflation is one of the most dangerous risks for the U.S. economy. The economy will freeze. The Eurozone and Japan are two crucial examples regarding deflation and negative interest rates. Such low demand and sales will cause prices, in general, to fall in the very near future, which is known by the economic term of deflation.
I started life with two great advantages: no money and good parents. Now, no money can be an advantage because you've jolly well got to fight your own way, and good parents are the best advantage of all. First, that we are more and more concentrating on redistributing the wealth we've got rather than creating any more. To create more, you need a slightly freer society, and you need an incentive society. Naturally, when I see that happening, I look with very great alarm to societies which have gone even further left.
He would rather the poor were poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That way you will never create the wealth for better social services as we have.
People who was born in a very fortunate time when my parents' generation and my grandparents' generation fought very hard for a welfare state in my country in which the rights of the individual were underpinned by the collective provision of free healthcare, free education, decent affordable housing, proper pensions. And that was, that's what we refer to as in my country as the post-war consensus. We changed that until Margaret Thatcher came along. And she decided that it would be better to have to pay less taxes. So she began to take apart the welfare state. And
We're coming slowly, painfully.
Margaret Thatcher got rid of all the industry. She kicked the life
out of working people because there was no work there, and people want to work. Margaret Thatcher has got a lot to answer for, and I don't hate anybody. She's left her mark on an era, not a good one.
A ghoulish caricature of the Iron Lady loomed over the crowd, a gathering in defiance of critics who described the idea of such a party as disgraceful. One of the biggest cheers was given to a contingent from the coalfields of Britain's northeast.
We're here in order to demonstrate that a very, very large percentage of the people, particularly the working class who she hated, don't agree with anything she did. We don't think she made Britain great. She destroyed everything that we made and handed us over to the bankers and the speculators.
Let me begin by making one point. You've heard speaker after speaker, mostly titled, come to the rostrum and trash the post-1945 welfare state. They would have you believe that from the 1945 general election and the election of the Attlee government to 1979, nothing good happened.
There's only one that really matters in the end. What's best for Britain? I've never believed that this country is a naturally socialist country. We're an independent people. We don't take easily to having more and more of our lives decided for us by the state.
It suits the Thatcherites to say nothing good happened. It suits the Thatcherites to create this Kafkaesque nightmare picture. But it wasn't the reality for my generation.
Margaret Thatcher saw inefficient industry and outdated practices in the mining world. But of course, closing mines meant thousands would lose their jobs. And in 1984, it all came to a head.
Austerity.
Tory austerity.
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 Austerity. This is the fundamental debate in this country and across Europe.
Austerity, fiscal austerity, that is, cuts in public spending and also increases in taxes. This was austerity, and it was part of an ambitious 5-year plan to wipe out the deficit entirely. This included deep cuts to welfare spending.
Welfare bills are coming down.
The cancellation of a host of school buildings programmes.
It's a tough economic situation out there.
Savage cuts to council funding.
Cuts of up to 10%.
And also
So, Western governments quickly set about cutting and saving. This was the age of austerity. But countries, it turns out, shouldn't be run like households. A growing economy is a much better place to pay off its debt, and austerity is not good for growth. But Britain, under Chancellor George Osborne, remained committed to cutting itself out of debt. Spending on welfare was slashed, social services cut, and the economy stagnated.
Over the past 8 years, the Conservative Party have used an austerity budget, that's their yearly plan of how they spend the nation's money, to make cuts, like so. And these cuts have consequences. Every time a cut is made, it adds pressure on society. The more cuts, the more pressure. And that can make our society less stable. So even though the Tories think that
The euro was a project that Europe set about on for really political reasons. It was a symbol of their determination to have peace on the continent. But they didn't really take the economics of it seriously. So Greece joins the euro in 2001, and initially it works out great for Greece because all of a sudden everyone was like, yeah, sure, let's lend the money. So they borrowed lots and lots and lots of euros, except that didn't change the fact that their economy is a lot weaker than some of the other European countries.
Police bring tears to the eyes of rock-throwing skirmishers in downtown Athens. And there are even a few casualties in this fracas. But it is a sideshow to the tens of thousands who marched for more jobs and fewer taxes. Here, the tears are of a different kind.
Less than a third of this country of 11 million is still employed. More jobs will evaporate in coming months as the economy sinks into a 5th year of recession.
You cannot keep on squeezing countries that are in the midst of depression at some point there has to be a growth strategy in order for them to pay off their debts, to eliminate some of their deficits.
Genau, wie sich die Dinge in Griechenland entwickeln. Und ich als Bundeskanzlerin habe die Aufgabe, dafür Sorge zu tragen, dass der Reformdruck auf Griechenland nicht nachlässt.
Είναι δυνατόν! Είναι δυνατόν!
Μας το κάψαν το χωριό μας, μας αφήσανε χωρίς νερό, χωρίς ρεύμα.
In recent weeks, a record heat wave sparked wildfires across Greece.
I meant, where is the EU? Where are the hordes of bureaucrats that for years came to Athens airport, disembarked in limousines, rushed in their hundreds to our ministries to impose severe cuts, including to the fire service, our hospitals, our pension system for the very, very poor. They were here, they were micromanaging. Where were those people when Greece was burning? Where were those people when the migration crisis, the refugee crisis, caused so much humanitarian pain?
Leading the charge, Charlotte Church, a singer who has said she'd pay 70% in tax to protect public services.
Is it a struggle to unify exactly what one cause to it all?
I don't think so, not at all. I think as soon as you go back, you could speak to many different people here, and everybody, basically the whole idea is about austerity, and no, austerity, it's not the only way.
Austerity is about making the rest of us pay for bailing out the bankers. Austerity is about making us even more unequal, and austerity is about dismantling our public services.
The International Monetary Fund is urging Britain to do more to boost growth in the face of the slow economic recovery there, but it's unlikely to persuade the Finance Minister George Osborne to change from his austerity programme.
Namely imposing austerity in the middle of a recession. It's called the Herbert Hoover principle. That's exactly what led to the World Depression.
As you can imagine, folks were really mad at Paul Volcker. Interest rates were almost as high as 20%, which meant that things like housing construction stopped, people didn't want to buy cars, people lost their jobs, and the GDP sunk below zero. People were really upset, including lawmakers and just American citizens in general. But Mr. Volcker didn't relent. He stood by his decision to keep interest rates high because he knew it was important to bring inflation down. And he was justified because that's exactly what happened. And one of the things that Mr. Volcker is credited with is that if you look over the course of this chart, inflation has never been as high as it was during that period. And so he gets a lot of credit for sticking by that difficult decision, even though people were really upset with him.
Trains were always late, the payphones were always broken, nothing worked. Worst of all were the recurrent strikes. Strikes by coal miners, strikes by dockers, strikes by printers, strikes by refuse collectors, strikes even by gravediggers. It felt as if there was no way back. And then came Margaret Thatcher. Between May 1979, when she entered 10 Downing Street as Prime Minister, and November 1990, when she stepped down, she changed everything. Thatcherism wasn't just about raising productivity or creating jobs. Just as important was the goal of defeating inflation and restoring prosperity to the middle class. This it emphatically achieved.
Can't think about the economy and the government's role in the economy like a child might think about a household budget, which is all that is being sold by both politicians of both sides. And it is the public debt it's a sign of the state of the economy, but it's not a cause of the state of the economy. And by focusing on that and trying to reduce the public debt, they're likely to push the economy, first of all, into another slump.
that the United States of America remains the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to our people as a right of citizenship. Health care is absolutely a human right, whether you're rich or whether you're poor or whether you are in the middle class.
Democrats and Republicans, let's get it done this year. This is all about a simple premise. Health care should be a right, not a privilege in America.
Come on, Charlie Brown. I'll hold the ball and you kick it.
Now that one of their own seems to be a firm no on the current package. Lisa Desjardins begins our coverage.
If I can't go home and explain it to the people of West Virginia, I can't vote for it.
The words dropped like boulders. On Fox News Sunday, Senator Joe Manchin suddenly threw President Biden's Build Back Better agenda into new turmoil.
After business hours, it was around 7 p.m. The president was supposed to be leaving for that rally in Virginia, and he was still talking to them. And the White House says that he made some progress, but clearly not enough to get to any kind of an agreement today. Here.
The president initially included in that social spending plan tuition-free community college, which he said would boost the middle class and help the U.S. compete with other countries. But in October, the White House revealed it dropped the proposal in a massive round of cost-cutting aimed at satisfying conservative Democratic lawmakers.
So that was really discouraging to hear.
We want our money back.
But 31% said they were either struggling to get by or just getting by, a figure that includes millions of middle-class Americans. In fact, it can be surprising to learn just which Americans continue to struggle.
In Japan, a rich person often lives in the same community and even next door to a middle or even lower economic class person, making it difficult to distinguish. The rich in Japan will spend money on things they enjoy, such as travel and the arts, but rarely flaunt their wealth on mansions and expensive cars. The art they do purchase is of Japanese origin, mostly feeling the need to put money back into the Japanese economy. The Japanese that earn less than people in other countries end up having more wealth in the long run due to wise investment choices. All told, Japan ranked third in the world in GDP, gross domestic product, in 2019, surpassing the $5 trillion US mark. This is very impressive due to the fact that the economy was hit hard in 2008 with a recession.
Maybe they could learn something from the boss of Japan Airlines, who takes a city bus to work. Merrill Lynch CEO John Thain spent more than $1 million decorating his office. But Haruka Nishimatsu knocked down his office walls so people can walk up and talk. And he works from a desk with an old-fashioned wooden in and out box.
Stopping by McDonald's for lunch. Or shopping for a computer. The prices of these things don't change much in Japan, but in the US they're going up. And inflation hit a 3-decade high in October. Where companies have found they're better off keeping their prices level. So, for example, train ticket prices in Japan haven't gone up that much for the last 30 years. Whereas in the US, the minimum fare on the New York subway has more than doubled over the same period.
日本の研究開発はすり合わせの技術をベースに発展を遂げてきております。オートバイ、自動車、カメラ、医療機器、こういったものはですね、まさにすり
Japan's machinery orders climbed to the highest in 2 years in November, adding to signs that the economy was rebounding in the final quarter of last year before the Omicron variant emerged.
Japan's exports picked up steam in November. They climbed 20.5% on the year, slightly less than forecast, but marking the 9th straight month of gains.
AT&T and T-Mobile say they have nationwide 5G in 2020. Check out their full-looking maps. Samsung's whole lineup is now 5G enabled, and Apple is expected to sell a 5G iPhone soon. But they're short on details about what exactly 5G means for speed right now. To see what you actually get out of a 5G phone in 2020, I've been carrying around 6 of them with me everywhere I go in the San Francisco Bay Area. I swapped results with firms that run network speed tests nationwide. None have found a generational improvement in America's next generation networks. According to OpenSignal, America's 5G is the second slowest in the world right now. What's going on? 5G marketing is getting ahead of 5G technology.
AT&T has nationwide 5G?
Yep.
And that's faster?
Faster.
The truth is, the tech that AT&T and T-Mobile have used for their networks, called low-band 5G, puts the emphasis on wider coverage rather than faster speed.
Now let's see what is the Japanese government doing to handle the declining economy. Well, the monetary policy and fiscal policy were two main ways to handle it. First, the monetary policy. In order to fight deflation, in 2013 the Central Bank of Japan decided to print money and double the cash flow into the market, while decreasing the interest rate to as low as -0.1%. Secondly, in fiscal policy the government started to spend more, and reduced the taxes. This means people have more money in hand, and they can spend on consumer items, that will generate demand, and eventually it would help the economy.
In Japan, whether inheritance taxes are required depends on the number of legal heirs and the value of the inherited property. There is a basic exemption of 30 million yen, equivalent to about 290,000 US dollars, plus 6 million yen, equivalent to about 58,000 US dollars multiplied by the number of legal heirs.
The results of these steps were quite good. Japan has maintained the inflation rate above 2%, and it has really helped the growth of the country.
The family of Samsung's late chair Lee Kun-hee revealed how the members will pay taxes on the billions of dollars they inherited from South Korea's richest man. It will be paid in installments and large donations will be made to charity. Here's Bae Eun-ji with the details.
The heirs of the Samsung Group will have to pay nearly 11 billion US dollars in inheritance taxes, by far the highest amount ever imposed on a South Korean company. The late Samsung chairman Lee Kun-hee, who was the country's richest man, left behind assets estimated to be worth nearly 27 billion US dollars when he passed away in October last year.
Because Japan does not have the problem that widening inequality is leading to the stagnation of people's incomes in the middle of the income distribution, while people in the top are growing or improving their situation very rapidly, whereas that's the situation in the United States.
Washington State is actually considering a wealth tax at the state level. I think that would be insanity.
I think the idea that rich people are undertaxed is ridiculous. The top 1% pay 39% of all federal income taxes now.
Profits are better than wages. Once I understood that, I got rich.
What's the best way to measure a country's economic growth and the prosperity of its citizens? Some think the U.S. government is using the wrong yardstick, particularly amid concerns about income inequality and other quality of life issues.
Money, not morality, is the principal commerce of civilized nations. Thomas Jefferson, 200 years ago. That is the philosophy that built this nation.
That only 15%
of the financial flows coming out of the biggest institutions in the U.S. are now going to business investments. So that is a big shift in what the financial system does. Apple had tons of money. It was being held offshore, a lot of free cash flow. They had, about 10% of all of corporate America's liquid assets at that point. Most of it, as we know, in tax havens. They're tax optimizing, not wanting to pay the U.S. rate, but yet using the debt markets here to borrow roughly the same amount, that money then being paid out to, let's call it generously the top 20% that owns 80% of the stock.
But what does it actually cost Apple to make one of these things? That's everything from sensors to the supporting materials to the assembly. That comes out to about $181. And that brings the total cost to about $490.50. That is less than half of that $1,100 retail price that you pay in stores.
See that in the data too. You can make an X with rise of finance since the 1980s, growth in buybacks and sort of financialized methods of corporate governance, fall in R&D spending as a percentage of revenue, fall in per capita startup activity, and all kinds of measures of entrepreneurial zeal in the economy are going down.
Consumer electronics are just one of many industries which have been lost in Western developed nations over the past 40 years. Prior to the 1970s, most durable goods consumed in America or Europe were produced right there in that country because that was the easiest and cheapest way to get things done. But this started to change when countries like Japan, South Korea, and ultimately China built out industrial centers of their own which could manufacture and deliver items to the Western markets for cheap. However, it is really important to understand that this would not have been possible with just cheap labor alone. It was actually the increase in trade deals that made it possible for foreign factories to compete with domestic factories. This had a few major benefits for the world economy. The salaries in these electronic factories may have been low, but they were still far better than what these workers would have made working on a subsistence farm. The other big thing that it did was make things a lot cheaper.
Something changed when Apple released the iPhone X. Not only was it more expensive, but the difference between the bill of materials and the retail cost was much greater. Obviously, Apple wants to make a profit, so the bill of materials has to cost less than the device. What makes Apple special is its ability to pull larger profits than its competitors. Instead of a technology company, think of Apple as a luxury brand. As with Gucci or Hermes, customers pay more because the logo is a status symbol.
Chinese leading tech company Huawei has moved up to a second place in the global smartphone sales share.
Huawei Technologies overtook Apple to become the world's #2 smartphone maker in the second quarter this year.
Skyrocketing in terms of volume, and a lot of that has to do with the Honor brand, which is actually responsible for 2/3 of this growth, pointing in this direction of budget devices being the future of devices in general when it comes to volume. Now, the reason this is important is because it inserts an individual into a particular ecosystem. If your first device is an inexpensive Honor device and you get familiar with Android, you buy all your apps on there, you use those messengers, WhatsApp, and so on, it becomes harder for Apple to eventually get their teeth into you. Some people will say, yes, but Apple is out there realizing the majority of the profits in the smartphone business. Sure, you're correct, they are. In fact, Huawei has stepped away from a profitability focus, and instead they're focusing solely on this rapid growth. Let's get people in the door, give away the free hotcakes, and maybe they'll stick around and buy the bacon and the sausages. The thing they need to be concerned is because this is the long game, all right? This is not about your lifetime. This is about forever in the smartphone business, in the technology business.
Apple does something else that's a bit sneaky, which is that when you're buying the iPhone, you can't add memory to it. So if you want more memory, you have to pay more Apple tax.
With Apple's computers, these upgrades get even more expensive. If you want a 13-inch MacBook Pro with 512 gigabytes of storage, you have to pay $400 more than the base model.
I'll hold the ball, and you come running and kick it.
Oh, brother. I don't mind your dishonesty half as much as I mind your opinion of me. You must think I'm stupid.
Google's VP of Comp said Google doesn't want to give, quote, smaller increments to everybody, but instead, quote,
We want to adjust it and pay it by performance.
Once again, workers making 4%. Whoa, really scary. I mean, billionaires making 28% each year and not being taxed. That's scary to me. Why can't workers make more than 4%? Why does everything have to go to the shareholders? Why do the shareholders and the management have to make as much money short term paying people 4% because, wow, I can't find people? 4%.
Julia, I think, raises some questions, issues, or maybe just makes some points about how companies are thinking about, I don't like talking about pay equality. I don't think anybody wants equality of pay, but the best people, right, should make more money. Now, how that judgment of best gets made, I guess, is a different question. But
I mean, what's the matter with the people making more money? Where does it say that those people shouldn't make more money without the Fed taking radical action?
But this is why Paul Tudor Jones looks at a situation like this and says, don't tell me, Jay Powell, that inflation's transitory. They're not going to roll back these menu increases. They're not going to do that. They're not going to roll back their wage increases, and nobody else is either.
We don't know that.